What books have had an impact on your life? Hey listeners, welcome to In the Arena. I'm Jackie Goldberg.
And I'm Leah Smart. And we are both big readers, so we thought today we'd just spend some time reflecting on some of the books that have had a big impact on us. And the hope is that you all hear some nuggets that you probably needed to hear today around how we were inspired by our books, but also maybe that you're inspired to start reflecting. I find a lot of times I'm reading books and back to back with them, and I don't actually sit down and say, what just happened here and what can I digest versus consume?
It's so true. And that's why being part of a book club is actually beneficial, because you take the time to really digest what you've read and then reflect and communicate with others and share those learnings. Because both of the books that I've chose, actually we read at work as part of a book club. So super excited to share that with our listeners today. I'm curious, Leah, what role did reading play in your life growing up?
So I have been reading, I've been a really intense reader since I was a young kid. And I was thinking about this story. I actually called my mom to get details on this. But in first grade, there was a big reading contest. And the contest was, how many books can you read in the full calendar year or full school year? So truly 9 months. And it was me and this other girl that were competing for first place. I had finished the year with 147 books read, and you had to turn in a slip for each book that you read. And so I unofficially won, and before they made the announcement, the other mom of the other girl found out I had won, and she went home and magically found 4 or 5 more slips so that the other girl ended up winning. And so it was hilarious. I called my mom to re-ask her the story, and I was like, she's getting pissed off.
She's still upset about it years later.
Exactly. What about you?
Yeah. Reading played such a big role in my childhood. My parents were both big readers, and I read before bed every single night for as long as I can remember. We used to have reading hour in my family. My parents say, okay, we're all going to read now. And we literally would all lay on the bed and read. When I was probably around 7 years old, if you asked me what I wanted to do with my life, I wanted to be a librarian. I actually put these like little manila folders at the back of all of my books and index cards with a stamp, and I would make my family check in and out of the books, and I would line them up by year that they were published, and I would create ISBN numbers. So I was a big reader. But I will say, reading is something that I love to do, and I also have to make the time for it today. Thankfully for Audible, which I'm a member of, I listen to a lot of books today, and I do try and read as much as possible.
Yeah, it's definitely much more intentional today than it was. Also, can we just pause on the fact that you even know what an ISBN number is?
Listen, if you want to be a librarian, you need to know the details.
The details, yep. Maybe in your next life or retired life. Cool. So we're going to just dive straight into 2 of our books that we each chose. And Jackie, I know you've got 2 that came from book club, so I'd love to just hear for your 2 books, what are they? How did they get to you? Just tell us.
Yeah. So the 2 books that I chose for today's episode to talk about, because as we know, there are a ton of books that we can talk about in terms of what we've learned from them, are Option B by Sheryl Sandberg, and then Bring Your Whole Self to Work by Mike Robbins. And interestingly, when I was reflecting on this, both of those books I read at a very pivotal time in my life. It was the middle of 2017. Option B was actually the first book that we read as part of a book club that I started at LinkedIn, a professional book club. The reason that book came to me was I was in bed one night. I had recently separated from my husband, and I was in a rental for a few months, kind of figuring out what my next steps were. And I was watching Sheryl Sandberg be interviewed on, I believe it was CBS. And she was being interviewed on this book, Option B, that she had just written. Her husband, Dave, had passed away a few years prior. And so she wrote this book to share how she really faced the adversity, how she dealt with it, and how to be resilient during times of challenges in our lives. Really using the death of David, which was, he had a heart attack. They were on vacation. It was really out of nowhere. They have 2 young boys, something that just hits you in the middle of the night. It came out of nowhere. So she wrote this book about how to find joy at the end of it. And, I was going going through a difficult time in my life. And so I was, and I had read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and I loved that book. And I really admire her just as a female leader. And so right away, I grabbed the book. I read the sample on my Kindle, and I said, okay, I'm going to start a book club at LinkedIn. And this is the first book that we're reading. The other book that I chose, and I'll get more into it, but was Bring Your Whole Self to Work. And similarly, this book came to me because of a mentor here at LinkedIn. I had, shared some of my transformation story at LinkedIn with a big group of people, about 500 or so salespeople. And he was really the person that helped me navigate that story and made sure that I was able to communicate it in a very thoughtful way. His coach had actually recommended Bring Your Whole Self to Work to him. And he had recommended to me because of my passion around being vulnerable, which came out from telling that story to these salespeople. I had said no, and after delivering this speech, I got such an overwhelming positive response from people who were inspired by my message, inspired by my transformation. And it was the vulnerability piece that really made that land in the way for those people. And that's when I felt so passionate about being vulnerable in the workplace and bringing your true self to work and all of that. So he recommended this book. And I will say it really has helped my career trajectory, because a lot of the work that I'm passionate about and do at LinkedIn is around bringing your whole self to work.
Awesome. And I haven't read Option B, but I've watched a video series with Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, and talking about how you can relate to people who've gone through loss or going through pain while at work, which I think is incredibly important that we not separate those two. And you mentioned, her whole theme being around finding joy. And I just wanted to ask you, where did you find joy while you were going through this hard thing? How did it help you find joy?
That's a great question. I think it's a lot about mindset and having the mindset to know that we are stronger than we think and that we can get through anything. And it's all about the inner work. And once you allow yourself to believe that and run with it, you're able to find joy and find gratitude in the things around you, even the hardships, right? I think another piece is knowing that you're not alone, right? Someone right now is having a heart attack, and someone's husband is passing away in this moment, in this world. And so really being able to connect that you are not alone, and just recognizing that the best way to get through it is to be resilient, and that the end will be joy if you allow yourself to do that. Option B was great for the workplace because, as you said, Sheryl working at Facebook, people were very uncomfortable to talk about what happened. And people, rather than being forward and saying, how are you? How are you doing? People just wouldn't ask. And it really surprised her, because it wasn't, she was okay to speak about it because it was what was going on for her in her life at that moment. I remember that one of my biggest takeaways was just that. My aunt had passed away very similar time frame of when I read this book. And the first time I had seen my cousin afterwards, I was in his apartment, and I had seen something that reminded me of his mom, my aunt, and I wanted so badly to say something, but I felt awkward bringing it up out of nowhere. And all of a sudden I remembered Option B and Sheryl's words and was like, no, I should be asking it. So I brought up, I said, your mom would have loved this piece of art because it reminded me. He goes, oh my God, I know. And we went to a whole conversation about my aunt and his mother, and I felt so relaxed in that moment and said, wow, this really makes a difference when you are vulnerable enough and to ask someone how they're doing rather than not asking at all. And I will say, with my father, recently passing away in the past year, his anniversary was very recently in January. And someone at work literally came up to me and said, I know this is about the time of year your father passed away. How are you doing? And I said, thank you so much for asking. We're doing okay. We're getting through it. And she said, I don't think I would have ever asked if I didn't read Option B. And she literally said that. And I said, wow, this book has had an impact on people.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. Brene Brown calls it sliding door moments, right? Where you have those moments where someone walks by you in the hallway and they can either choose that moment to be vulnerable, to be awkward, to build trust with you, or to kind of keep going and pretend nothing's going on. So it is such a vulnerable and courageous thing to do. But I'm hearing, even, listeners can't see you, but I can see you. I can see the passion and the impact that it's had. And I'm curious for you, I hear a lot of this in what you've said, but why did you choose to have this be your book for today?
I think that, Sheryl says it's long believed that people need to feel supported and understood at work. I think we know that very much when we're in our personal lives. And sometimes we do put up this barrier when we come into the workplace about talking about what's going on for us. And I think this book really shows that not even, in the face of tragedy, but in general, daily things that are going on in people's lives, it's okay to ask, how are you? And really be with someone while you're at work. And so option B is relevant because we talk about all these topics on this podcast that are about who we are at our best selves, our truest selves. And that is at work and at home, right? And so kind of blending of the two. She also just has some really good takeaways. She really talks a lot about resilience not being fixed. It's more about asking, how could I become more resilient? And how can I find joy in this? She also talks about, we know there's post-traumatic growth, right? Something traumatic can happen to us and we can grow from that because we've just seen the worst. But what about pre-traumatic growth, right? Something around, you don't have to experience a tragedy to build your resilience for whatever lies ahead. You can really take that step to be resilient before something even happens. So the example she gave is that one of her friends started writing letters to her different friends on their birthdays, letting them know how much that her friendship means to her. And some of her friends started following that lead. And this shows pre-traumatic growth, right? Nothing happened to this woman that said, I'm now going, she didn't lose a best friend and then decide to write letters. She just said, I'm going to, in the moment, show my love for these people. So it's going to help me grow, help them grow, and just learn lessons that you don't need to learn just from death.
Yeah, there's Marianne Williamson talks about the fact that so many of us learn through pain instead of joy, right? So sort of that idea of how do you learn through joy or grow through joy versus growing through that pain of something happened and now I'm going to be different. Yeah. That's really beautiful. How about bring your whole self to work? Tell me about who needs to read this book.
That's a great question. So Bring Your Whole Self to Work, for those of you who don't know, written by Mike Robbins. What you'll see on the cover of the book is how vulnerability unlocks creativity, connection, and performance. So it's interesting because both of these books, and I'm not too surprised I chose these and that they've resonated with me so deeply because I am very passionate about this type of work. But both of these books are around vulnerability, and being your looking within and doing some inner work, but also how it comes into the workplace, right? So very the blend of that personal and professional. So Bring Your Whole Self to Work, he has really 5 main aspects to it, and I'll just run through them very quickly so our listeners can hear. One is being authentic. So he talks all around authenticity. He talks about the power of appreciation, a little bit about gratitude and recognition as well, focusing on emotional intelligence, growth mindset, and then creating a championship team. And in terms of, to answer your question about who should read this book, it's not easy for everybody to be vulnerable in general, but in the workplace. As a leader especially, you have to lead with vulnerability if you want your team to be vulnerable. There's a very important thing that happens to a leader when they are vulnerable. It really helps elevate the level of psychological safety within a team. And we know that psychological safety is the number one aspect that separates a high-performing team from a low-performing team. And what we mean by that is that there's trust enough that's built within the team to help people feel like they can take risk, that they can speak up without being ridiculed, that they can be creative because they know that if they fail, they'll have someone right there to pick them up. And so for reading this book, I think it's really good for leaders who have trouble maybe opening up a little bit with their colleagues, with their teammate members, and who are really looking to better themselves, but also better their management style and create a team that's really going to work together and be that championship team that Mike talks about in the book.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Anything else you want to share on these books? I know you went through these 5 pillars. Was there a pillar of the 5 that you feel like just really got you going or surprised you?
I would really recommend this book for anyone who is looking for some quick tools or actions that they can take away in order to enhance their team. One thing that Mike talks about, and he actually just came out with a Harvard Business Review article very recently around the distinction between recognition and appreciation. So recognition is about what people do, so it's about their results, and appreciation is about who people are, their inherent value. And so he goes to this appreciation seat exercise where in a team, everyone has a chance for 3 minutes to be in the appreciation seat, and everyone around the team has 3 minutes to tell that person what they appreciate about them. And that person can only accept the compliment, because we know so many times in life we don't accept the compliment. We actually not accept it and say, actually, no, that's not, or deflect it or give back a compliment to that person. So you just have to sit with it. So, I think there are a lot of different things that he talks about. That was one that really rang true for me. But I, definitely recommend it to anyone in the workplace who's really focused on authenticity.
I like the appreciation piece. That's a core pillar in coaching. Also, we call it acknowledgement. And so it's about telling someone, you are incredible or you are courageous or whatever it is, and letting that person sit with it. Oftentimes, I find it can be really hard to give other people acknowledgments or appreciation when you don't appreciate yourself.
Oh, yeah. It starts with you, right? Yeah.
And so if you aren't able to do it, it's harder to get through it. But once you start doing it, it's a practice. And I actually led a workshop where I did something very similar.
Yeah.
And people were emotional because you don't get appreciated very often, even by the people that you love. It's not for lack of love. It's for, lack of understanding of how important it is.
Yeah. And for our listeners who may not be interested in reading the whole book or don't have the time, at the end of the book, he actually has a breakdown of some of these exercises and some of the biggest takeaways. So I highly recommend that. But I want to hear about your books, Leah. Yes. So why don't you share, what books did you choose and why?
Yeah, so similar to you, I think the books are just important as their timing. So I chose The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho and The Universe Has Your Back by Gabrielle Bernstein. And I love how our books are very different, but they have this kind of common thread around becoming your best self, around your impact, around the way that the world works. So I chose The Universe Has Your Back for a couple of reasons. One was that this book came to me at a hard time that I was having last year. And what it really did was help me connect back to myself, to my own spirituality, to my own belief in, life having a path drawn out for me, and to be able to kind of reinstate my own faith in that, my own faith in the universe. I love Gabrielle Bernstein's just style, and I did this on Audible. I'm also an Audible member, so I listened to it, and just listening to her voice and listening to her stories really helped me reconnect to myself and then also to others. So this was just a huge pillar of a book that then put me on a path where I started going deeper into my own spirituality, and I hadn't expected to do that. So it's a powerful book for that reason. The other is that Gabrielle Bernstein is one of the first people post Marianne Williamson who talks about a book called A Course in Miracles. And it's not just a book, it is a form of study. You could call it a spiritual path, whatever it is. But she really talks about it and brings it sort of into the millennial space. And so I love kind of hearing her stories, and again, hearing the way that she helps people who are, a little bit, younger and may not have heard of Marianne Williamson or her work actually get involved in this and realize that, they are just as spiritual as others are.
Yeah. And I know, spirituality is something, we talk about a lot outside of this podcast. We've brought it into this podcast, but I'm curious, how has the work you've done since, reading this book, or how has this book impacted you in the workplace? Has anything changed for you in that way?
So yes, actually. So after I read this book, or right around the time I read this book, I actually ended up signing up for Kabbalah, which was something I was always curious about. I'm very interested in following my curiosities, so I decided to sign up for it. One of the most powerful things that's come to me through Kabbalah is one of their spiritual tools that's called Pause, What a Pleasure. And I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast before, but the idea is that we react to a lot of things without actually thinking about how we want to respond. And so that pause that we allow ourselves instead of reacting to someone allows us to respond from our best version of ourselves. And so that was one big thing that's happened for me that's changed the way I am in the workplace, or the way I practice being. And I'm not perfect, so it's definitely there. And then I think just about work in general, it's shifted. So not just the workplace, but the work I do, why I do it, and the understanding that like the universe really does have my back. And there really are things that, I don't believe there's any such thing as a coincidence.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You mentioned the term, it happened for me. That's something that happened for me. And it's interesting because Mike Robbins actually talks about that distinction, what's happening to me versus for me, and how the growth mindset is around for me. Is that something that you've learned either from this book, or where did you learn that?
Yeah, that's from Tony Robbins. So he, I went to one of his weekends, Unleash the Power Within, and he that was just a moment where I was like, oh my God, like talk about a cognitive reframe happening to me versus for me is like, whoa. And it's sort of like what you talked about earlier around the silver lining and finding gratitude and being able to reframe and say, where is the gift here, even when it doesn't feel like a gift in the moment, which is really beautiful. And that's kind of what that book alludes to. And then the other book I chose is The Alchemist, which if you haven't heard of it, by Paulo Coelho. He wrote this book in 2 weeks, which is pretty insane. There are over 35 million copies sold. It is the most translated book in the world by a living author. So if you haven't read it, it's an incredible book. I relate to it for a couple of reasons. It's sentimental to me because my parents gave it to my older brother when we were really young. So I read it at a really young age, around like 8 or 9. And then I read it again starting in my 20s and kind of put it down. But I read it again last summer. And again, it was one of those things where it came to me at a time where I was open to receiving it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a story of a young shepherd boy. It's a fiction book. So it's a story of a young shepherd boy who goes on this sort of pilgrimage to find a treasure. And throughout the book, you see his journey. He, has all these misfortunes befall him, but he continues to follow his heart. He continues to trust the universe. He continues to follow the signs. And eventually, I'm not going to ruin the end, but it's an incredible book with a lot of lessons that I honestly think are just so universal to being alive.
What makes it so incredible?
There's something that, like, thinking about the first time I read it, there's like something inside of me that lights up. Some of the quotes I think are what light me up, but it just feels true, if that makes sense. It feels like when you read it, you're going, oh my gosh, of course this is true. So one of my favorite quotes in the book is, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you achieve it. And that's really is the story of the boy. He has a deep desire for multiple things, and the universe conspires in helping him achieve it. He also goes through a lot of crap. So it's not like he's got this bright fairy tale story. He has pain, and yet he comes out the other side, and you see how everything all sort of makes sense. So yeah, I think just for me, it's something just comes alive in me that makes me feel like it's true, but also fiction is a huge love of mine. I love getting lost in fiction books.
And what's funny is the quote that you just pulled out from The Alchemist seems very similar to the universe has your back, right? Yeah. So there's definitely a theme there that speaks to you.
Yeah, it's the universe.
It's the universe.
Yeah, so I really just think it's a beautiful story. Quick read.
What's your biggest takeaway from The Alchemist that you can share with our listeners?
So it actually would be another quote that I pulled from the book. Can I share 2 takeaways?
You can share 2 takeaways.
Okay. So it's... In the last year, I've struggled a lot with fear and battling my own fears, and also knowing that, I've always kind of known when I was meant to do something, but my fear would keep me from doing that thing. And so the quote is, "Don't give in to your fears. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart." And it's one of my favorite quotes.
I love that.
It's so beautiful, and it just... Yeah, it really speaks to me. One way that you can think about putting this into practice that I use now is called the 5-second rule by Mel Robbins. Can't remember if I've mentioned this before, but if I have, mention it again because it's that powerful. When there's something you want to do, you count down from 5 to 1 and tell yourself to go, and you just do the thing. So there's so many times that we don't do it, and then a year passes or 2 years pass and we go, oh my gosh, I still haven't done that thing. So that's one. And then the other quote that I loved from the book that speaks to something I believe is, intuition is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life. To me, what this means in the way I talk about intuition is, I feel like your intuition is really like the universe speaking to you. And it's not your loud head voice. It's like that gut when you just know, or you have a hunch, whatever you want to call it. So those are 2 things, that quotes and 2 learnings that I took away and went, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So those are my 2 books. Yeah. I feel like it was actually a perfect balance between both of us. Your books being about resilience and being around being vulnerable, and mine kind of being a little bit more spiritual. And it's all sort of weaving together. Obviously, you and I are both so passionate about all of these topics.
I also, it's interesting, 3 out of 4 are nonfiction, right? The Alchemist is the only fictional one. But, there are some real life lessons in something, obviously The Alchemist, but like in fictional books too. It just so happened that we chose 3 out of 4. Was it hard to choose these 2 books for you? Like narrow it down to 2?
I had another one chosen, but no, I think it was, I think it's similar to what you said earlier. When when a book hits you at the right time, it has a really special landing.
Yeah.
And you just don't forget. So it was easy to say, oh yeah, of course, those two. How about for you?
Yeah. It was and it wasn't. You know, I what I loved about these two books was that they're very, you know, personal and work related. So I think it was, you know, for this podcast, for this discussion, I felt like I wanted to do something that's really helped drive me in the workplace and can drive our listeners. But I think that we can do this type of episode 100 more times, right? And just continue to take books that we love, that we've learned from, that we've grown from, and share it with our listeners.
Totally. And what are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? That is a great question. I haven't started it, but I just bought Shoe Dog. It's the Nike book, so I just downloaded that. That will be my next read. I just finished Bad Blood, which was a great book as well.
You're on like a whole,
I love the nonfiction route. Yeah, I really do. I just learned so much. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I need to squeeze in a fiction book. You know, vacations are good for that.
Yeah.
What about you?
I am reading Little Fires Everywhere, which is a nonfiction book. And then I'm also listening to Becoming Supernatural, which is by a neuroscientist named Joe Dispenza. Really interesting blend between neuroscience and quantum physics and weird stuff like that.
I love that question. What are you reading now? You learn so much about someone. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's that. Thank you to our listeners for joining us. Hopefully we, A, gave you some great lessons to take away, but also B, you know, got you thinking about the books that you are reading or want to read, and give yourself some space to reflect on them.
Thanks, everyone. If you want to continue listening, you can find us on iTunes or Spotify by searching In the Arena LinkedIn. Have a great day.